Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Leading the Early Years for the Future. I am your host, Amie Fabry, and I am so excited to be speaking with the very amazing Becky Carlzon today. Becky is an educator, and she's co-author of the wonderful book, Powering Up Children. She's also a founder of not one, but two international learning communities, Press Play and Learning Pioneers. Becky, we crossed paths a couple of years ago via social media, and you constantly fill up my feed with really thought-provoking posts. I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for such a lovely, warm introduction. I really appreciate that. And I'm excited to be here and really excited about your podcast and to be tuning in with all the other guests that you're having. So thank you.
Before we dive into your professional story, I'd love to know what lights you up. One of the things I do really appreciate about you is your humanness. And we all have these professional roles, but we are multidimensional human beings. I'd love to know a bit more about the Becky that sits outside your professional work. Do you have a hidden talent? Do you have something, like a hobby or interest that really lights you up and brings you joy outside of the amazing work you do?
Well, that's a really great question. So, first of all, I see professional and personal growth totally intertwined. So I don't see them as separate. And I think the more that we lean into that, the more we can show up fully, authentically as human beings in the workplace and beyond. And I think that comes a lot from, I learned so much from both of the learning communities, Press Play and Learning Pioneers, because I get to interview all the speakers and interact with them. So Mark Finnis is a brilliant thinker around relationships. And he always says, we had it really early on in Learning Pioneers, share a little bit of yourself. But actually, you can share a lot of yourself. It's not like a separate thing. It's like we're humans showing up and there to support one another. So what lights me up? Learning lights me up. But that goes beyond like play, learning power, inquiry. They're all my kind of favorite learning approaches. But being a lifelong learner and being curious in life, that's what lights me up. So continually learning and also kind of putting well-being first. So I'm just straight out of a yoga class, hence the outfit. Prioritizing well-being and within that balance. So having this kind of balance of, you were saying about my posts on social media, and one of the recent blog posts I wrote was about balance in education and how inquiry brings balance in education, but it brings a balance of yin and yang energies. So we've kind of been taught to push, do, and that results in burnout. Or what about allowing, being, reflecting? And the more I lean into that, the more I realize daydreaming is like one of my favorite things to do. So I'm a massive daydreamer. So currently in Koh Samui, like lying in the sea, just letting ideas like bubble up and flow, and how nourishing that is. And then transferring that back into school. How much are we valuing daydreaming? Hardly at all. And it's super, super powerful and important. So that's just a bit about what lights me up.
Oh, that's amazing. And I can't say I'm surprised by your response, given what I know about you and what you post. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's so important that we lean into being fully human, showing up as we are, whether we're educators, leaders, or children, and actually encouraging them to be their full selves in learning environments as well. I think we could spend a whole hour just unpacking all of those things, but I really want to dive into your work as well. Can you tell us a bit about what you do?
So in relation to Learning Pioneers and Press Play, which you mentioned earlier on, they're what fills me up professionally. I just love diving into those communities and supporting the educators in there. And it's one of my favorite things to log in either after a break or after the weekend, or just even the next day, and going in and seeing the kinds of comments and posts community members are putting in. Because I just get so excited about their new ideas. You can see people changing in the comments. You can see them reflecting, feeding back, digesting the provocation. And then by the end of the comment, they're a different person. And I just find that so invigorating. And then I get to feed back on that. So love the work I do. That is just joy to me. Learning Pioneers is nearly reaching its 5-year anniversary in January. So that's nuts to me. So, we started as a community of just 12 of us, and it's grown way beyond that. And just, linking to posts on LinkedIn as well, was basically built on a series of wouldn't it be cool ifs. So that's a journaling prompt I learned from a coach called Jessie Elder. And it's a really beautiful way of visioning and imagining. And then you just make that stuff happen. And it's really fun. So we just kept with Learning Pioneers just asking, wouldn't it be cool if, and wondering, wouldn't it be cool if, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? Wouldn't it be cool if we did that? And it was just built gradually on responding to those things that lit up our spirit. And when I say we, it's me and the whole community and the beautiful advocacy team that we have as a kind of central heart to our community, who are always kind of ideating and thinking how they can make the community better. So that's kind of Learning Pioneers. It's really like quite an advanced learning ecosystem. We've worked hard at thinking about what community looks like and what a living systems model of leadership would look like. So it's intentionally not top down. I'm not the person at the top at all. It's intentionally built around a more circular kind of spherical distributed leadership model where each of the advocates are leading in different ways. And I'm the facilitator and the navigator. So, just recently I did a talk with a Progressive Education's conference. And somebody in that conference asked me, what's stopping us from bringing these kind of visions to success in our schools? And one of the key blockers is this top-down leadership model that's so suffocating. And as soon as you get like either someone who isn't examined and isn't reflective, or somebody who's a blocker, or somebody who doesn't really care in a leadership position, it messes up the entire thing. So if we have that distributed leadership, we have that agency, and the co-creation process with my advocacy team is what's lighting you up? What can you bring from your talent set that will make a difference to the community? What are you seeing that's missing? What are we learning from our feedback? Right, what can we create together? And so they feel lit up because they're bringing forward something that they love and they're playing to their strengths. And it's therefore a win-win-win. It's impacting on everyone in the community. So yeah, that's a little bit about the model of Learning Pioneers. And Press Play, we've created because kind of, as I said before, my interests are learning power, inquiry and play. But play is such, as you know, a nuanced, complex thing to bring forward. Play should and should be central to learning all throughout primary, into secondary and beyond. And we just interviewed Sagata Mitra, and he was reflecting on how he played early on in his, in school, and then he didn't play the whole of school, and then he got to do his research, and now he plays again. And it's like, why the gap? But embedding play throughout primary, throughout secondary, is hugely challenging. There are so many blocks to get past, teacher mindset, looking at how to embed the curriculum, looking how to be playful as adults, adult interactions in play. That's one of the really trickiest things. So I felt like that needed a separate approach. And brilliantly, Kim Scott and I, who is the co-runner of Press Play, connected in lockdown. And we just were like, should we launch this community together? We met like 2 years later in person. We were like, let's do it. So that's where Press Play and there's kind of was born, and there's a massive crossover between the two. So we're always kind of sharing content from one community to the other because there's always overlap. So currently in Learning Pioneers, we're looking at kind of inquiry-led practice. So we've been looking at loose parts and how to take play through primary, and those are Press Play lives that we've brought across. So there's a lot of reciprocity between the two.
Amazing. I'd love to know what brought you into this space. I know you were an educator working in schools before. What kind of led you to then move into this space and create these professional learning communities and work alongside educators?
It was a total accident, total chance, but brilliant chance. So the way that started, it's one of those things, and this is a really good little bit of personal growth for people, is that reflection on the things in your life that lead to the other things in your life. So that Ron Richard talks about learning moves. So I transferred that to think about life moves. So what life moves have you made that have led to where you are now? And what life moves could you have made to have a different outcome? So we're the co-creators of our lives. So the life moves that led to Learning Pioneers, it's part of that is saying yes to life and saying yes to opportunities and being a little bit cheeky. So the very beginning of that was having a relationship with Guy Claxton, was working with Guy Claxton, who, if anybody's listening and hasn't heard of his work, that's the first thing you need to do. You need to look at Guy Claxton because he's brilliant at provoking thinking and really well thought through pedagogy. But so the cheeky part was I was living in Argentina and I was brilliantly landed on my feet in a school that taught English through storytelling. And I told them a bit about Guy Claxton's work and they were like, oh, let's invite him over. I was like, yeah, let's. I had absolutely no idea how challenging that was going to be. It was super challenging to, even just with the currency conversion, to get a big consultant over to Argentina and where nobody had heard of Guy. I was like, have you not heard of Guy? But of course they hadn't. So that being a bit brave and doing something a bit challenging was the starting point for me then eventually, and there's loads more steps in between, but eventually writing a book with Guy, which led to me going to teach in an international school in Bangkok. And one of my friends had read our book and kind of pinpointed all of the kind of tabs. And she was like, I want to put this all into practice. I'm like, well, we're friends. I'm here. Let's do it together. And why not invite some other people? So we created a study group. And that was the seed of Learning Pioneers, because we did that in school, planned like reflective pieces, looked at each of the design principles. And then the next, wouldn't it be cool if is, wouldn't it be cool to do on an international platform? There are people developing this across the world. And that came in parallel with the frustration of writing a book. So like ideas don't fit into a book in a frozen space in time. So as much as I loved writing that book with Guy, it was like, this isn't it. There's more. Like this can look so, this is like you said, multidimensional. It's multidimensional. This can look different in an infinity of ways. You know, it's not just one book with these ideas. So that's what a creative learning community creates the opportunity for infinite learning experiences and infinite connections. So yeah, it was that then first step to get that online. And then just another piece of serendipity. As I kind of thought that, my brilliant husband found a community course with Mighty Networks, which is where Learning Pioneers sits. So I took that to understand how to build the network, built the network, and then, it was just from there. So it wasn't intentional. I didn't sit there saying, I'm going to create a learning community. It was just like, it was about taking our best next step. It was like, oh, this is a good idea. Oh, let's do this next. Okay, let's do this next. So it just kept growing.
What a fascinating story. It's so brilliant here. And what I love about it so much is that, it sounds like you definitely are someone who just embodies lifelong learning, but also is open to seeing what's possible and where the opportunities are. And, you did mention being brave. It sounds like you are very courageous, and it also kind of sounds like an easy journey, like, oh, that's the next step and that's the next step. What has your experience been like, sort of leading this work that you're doing, building these communities? I mean, you mentioned the challenge writing a book, but have you experienced any other challenges along the way, or what has your experience been like as a leader in this space?
Oh, such a good question. What were the challenges? I mean, that's the juicy thing about life. When there's a challenge and a grapple, it's like that becomes an inquiry and an opportunity. So it's stepping from fear to love, basically, instead of being scared of those challenges, leaning into them and thinking, oh, how can we solve this together? So probably a couple of the biggest challenges around building a learning community have been supporting members to lean into their growth. So that's really nuanced. I'm still grappling with that. But some of the things involved in that are executive functioning skills. So how well do you organize your time? So this kind of grapple of what's the difference between a member who logs in once, gets really excited and then disappears, and a member who consistently shows up for their own growth and comes back in. And those are the people who fly. They're changed people very, very quickly, have a huge amount of confidence, a huge amount of ideas, and they're just buzzing and beaming, and you see it and you feel it. So how can I support people to go from this to this? So that's been a really interesting inquiry and grapple and challenge. What's blocking people, and what can I help unearth for those people so that they can have their own agency and take responsibility for that? And how can we make Learning Pioneers as inviting, as clear, as organized as possible so that it's easy to engage with the content? And that's been a really big challenge for me because James Adu, our coach, talks about knowing yourself to lead yourself, and we're coaching with him right now. And he does this approach called the 5 Voices leadership coaching. So you learn what your voice order is, and then you learn what your love language is for your team, what other people's love languages are, how to interact and support one another, and also what the shadow side of your voice is and what your nemesis voice is. It's really powerful. So my nemesis voice is the guardian voice, and the guardian voice shows up as asking a lot of challenging questions, sounding like they're blocking an idea, like they want to know the plan, they want to know all the details. So I'm here visioning and thinking of really lovely, creative, big things, and then they're going to say, but what about this and what about that? Which I don't mind, but it can dampen your idea. But it also means, because it's my final voice, the organizational side of things can be more challenging for me. So it's really challenging for me to think what's a really smooth onboarding process, because it's not my strength skill set. So that's been a challenge. I have to kind of grapple with that. Inspiring content and visioning and connecting people, I can do all of that, but creating a really structured system doesn't come naturally to me. So that's been a challenge, teaching myself to do that.
Wow, amazing. That's so real and honest. And I think as you were talking, I couldn't help but reflect on, as educators, whether you're working with children or working alongside adults, that role of the educator and how powerful it is to, as you say, not just have inspiring content, but actually recognize and notice that everyone's at a different place in their own journey, right? Like you're talking about educators who come along and have chosen to be part of your learning community, but they are still getting different things out of that community depending on where they're at and perhaps their time or executive function, like you're talking about. And really understanding those individual differences, I guess are just a common thread across human beings, right? How do you get to know the people in your community better so that you can be responsive and try and, I guess, meet them where they're at and, create that environment, like you're saying, that is going to enable everyone to feel that they belong and that they can get the most out of that community, even though they might be at different places?
That's another great question. That's a continual discussion with our advocacy team. And one discussion we had with our team not so long ago was looking at our values and what really, we got a lot of values, but lifting up those really key ones. And because we discussed that as a team, there were ones that came up that if I'd have just thought to myself, I wouldn't have picked up. And one we lifted up was intentionality. And I loved that because we are super intentional. Every single move we make in Learning Pioneers is curated to bring the growth and the connection of the community on. So we're really purposeful with that. So different ways we create that connection, I mean, so many ways. And actually, it's great for me to reflect on this. And we do loads for that. So Diksha Carbander's one of our advocates. She runs a wins post every month, comes out the 15th of every month so that everyone can celebrate something they're winning at. That's really intentional because I don't know if you know about peak end theory and what, basically when we hear something negative, it's like Velcro and it'll stick. And when we hear something positive, it's like Teflon and it slips off. And so as educators, we're going through our days and all those negative bits, comments, things are sticking to us and we're forgetting to raise up the positive. So it's an intentional move to keep us buoyant and keep us focusing on our wins. So that's one example. Diksha also runs campfires and they are co-created with the community. So we'll gather online on a Zoom and we will discuss a topic of the moment. So we've talked about how to embed creativity. We reflected on what executive functioning skills look like in play and inquiry and how we can develop those intentionally with that lens. So that creates that kind of online connection. Marie Whiteley is our Australian hub leader and elder. And she has intentionally created that space to be able to connect in place and time for members in Australasia, because obviously usually I'm in the UK, not now, I'm in Thailand, but I'm based in the UK. So she's really focused on creating in-person meetups so that people can really connect in person. And we look very carefully at time zones because we're international. So we try to be inclusive of people who are in the States and Canada and Argentina. We've got some people from Argentina, and then people who are in kind of Europe and Africa, and then people who are in Southeast Asia, Australasia. So to make sure we're being inclusive of all those kind of time zones. Those are just a few ways. And then we run masterminds as well. And they're really the kind of highest level growth ticket in Learning Pioneers, because you're showing up regularly to really pack a punch to your growth and be reflective. So every 2 weeks, you're working away your growth and you're carving out that time. They're really, really powerful. And many people in our masterminds have been there since the very beginning and just haven't left because they find it so powerful. So those are a few different ways we create connection.
Wow. They're so well considered. And I think I'm reflecting on, earlier you talked about not having a top-down approach, and actually, that this is a community that is also driven by the people within the community. It's not about you just deciding everything and how it all works. And I can hear that in all of those examples, that you've got these other leaders who are able to put forward their ideas, to lead celebrations, to lead a group in different time zones, and to offer multiple opportunities for people to come together. So it's not just a one size fits all, and you've got masterminds to offer additional challenge for those who want it. It's so refreshing, I think, to actually unpack what this kind of community can look like in practice, because I think, from my experience, and particularly, if I think back to even that conversation you were having around schools and why this is such a challenge for schools in particular, that top-down model of leadership, I think, is still quite pervasive in our schooling system. And, you can see and hear when you talk to educators that are feeling not valued, not heard, like things are being done to them rather than being able to actually step into their own agency. Have these learning communities always followed this kind of model, or is there, particular practices that you've brought in as you've learned more and connected more with the people in those communities along the way?
Another great question. So Learning Pioneers has been like that from the very beginning. And it's another piece of serendipity. Like, books seem to fall into my lap at just the right moment, like exactly the book I need for what I'm looking at. So really early on in Learning Pioneers, I found a book called Regenerative Leadership. I can't remember the names of the authors. Giles, somebody who's just up the road from me in the Cotswolds when I'm back in the UK. And I've forgotten the name of his co-author, but that showed the living systems model. And it was all about, like, the entire book is about being more human, more humane, more sustainable. So it was just absolute divine timing. It was like, yeah, that's what Learning Pioneers is going to be built on. And then as a follow-up to that, I read another book called Impact Networks. So if anybody's thinking about setting up learning communities or are focusing on their schools and how they could shift that model, those are both really great books. And the key thing with impact networks is just like great teaching, right? And this is what I love. You can kind of go, what would I do in the classroom? How does that look in leadership? What's that going to look like for our learning community? And in great teaching, in all year groups, I taught early years a lot. I measured how good a teacher I was and was becoming by how long I could leave the room for and how long the learning would continue. Ideally all day without me. I'm just like the added bonus. So it's the same for Learning Pioneers in the learning community. So that's what Impact Networks looks at, is if there's one person who's the key person to that community, it's fragile. What happens if that person goes? Same with the classroom. If they're relying on me, that's a fragile learning community. So what Impact Networks looks at is how to create more of a model where there's that distributed leadership, other people are in charge, things are running in different ways. So another key thing we have built into Learning Pioneers, which I don't know, this was just my idea, I think, that basically what I'm doing for me should be the same for all of my team. How I show up and what's for me is for them too. So I built in the model when I stepped out of the classroom and committed fully to learning pioneers and press play. I immediately got a coach to make sure that I didn't repeat the model that schooling had taught me, because school had taught me there's not enough time. You need to work really hard. You should be working like 60 hours a week. So all of this is in my subconscious programming. I don't want to take that forward. I want the opposite. So I intentionally found a coach, Rebecca Hartnell. She's amazing. And we worked on how to put my well-being first before everything else and how to create a sustainable business model. So when I time block my week, my yoga, meditation, qigong, time in nature all goes in first. It's absolutely non-negotiable. That is the priority. Nothing's going to carve into that. That's done. So it all gets blocked first. And then after that, those really important pieces of deep work. So what's going to make a really big difference to my business that I'm moving forwards on? Masterminds, because that's where I really need to show up. And perhaps like a meeting with an inspiring educator like you, that's going to be like, okay, this is going to lift me up and this is going to create shared opportunity. And then all of the kind of other bits around it. And I never work more than 25 hours a week. And the intentionality behind that is it's then 50-50. It's like as much yin as yang. Again, it's like I'm living that as my own model. And, things like that daydreaming space, meditation, that's where my best ideas come from. So it's super important. I've got to say I plan in learning too before my deep work. So reading gets time blocked before everything else. And within the model of learning pioneers, all of our team has 8 months in the community and 4 months out. And that is really intentional. So they have that backspace, so they have that reflection space, so they can prioritize holidays or times when they're report writing if they're in schools. And for me, that's really, really important for me to be able to step away, let it be, trust, and do whatever it is I'm going to be doing in my own work. So I'm about to do that next week. I've got 6 weeks out of my community, and that's going to focus on writing my next book. I'm on a book writing retreat, self-imposed, and I'm going to a 10-day silent retreat, which I'm so excited about. I say I'm excited. It's probably going to be challenging, but at the moment, I'm excited.
That is exciting. And as you said before, challenges are where growth happens, right? So
yeah.
That sounds remarkable, Becky. I'm thinking about so many of our educators who would be going, well, that's all well and good. You only work 25 hours a week. How do I have time to do that? But I think as I listen to you, I'm just reminded so much that, and again, this comes back to what you said earlier, that we actually, these are our own lives that we do have agency to control and make decisions about. And I think sometimes we forget, that we can actually plan our time, and so many people, particularly in schools and early learning, because there's so much to do and there's so much pressure put on us. Everybody's saying we don't have enough time, when, I think sometimes it is actually helpful to stop and think about the fact that we have time. It's just how we prioritize our time. And yes, there'll be demands where we don't get to make decisions, but we all have time in our lives that we do get to make decisions about what we do. And I love that, you are a living, breathing example of actually prioritizing yourself and your own well-being. And, I love that you talk about having that time, that downtime for your own daydreaming. I know myself from experience, when I have been really frenetic working, I feel like, I can't do great thinking. I'm just in survival mode. And when I notice that and can pull back and actually prioritize, walking or yoga or meditation or things that give me that chance to switch off, that's when all the good ideas come out.
That's it. 100%. So a couple more things on that. One is you're touching on my favorite personal reading book. I think it's the only book that anyone needs to read if they want to invest in their personal growth. And it's called I'm going to forget it. It talks about the empowerment dynamic, The Power of TED. That's the title of it, The Power of TED. So I don't know whether you've heard of the victim triangle. So when we are kind of unconscious and in a kind of default setting, we can play between these three roles. We're either a victim in our lives, we're a rescuer, so we're trying to save people, or we're a perpetrator, so basically a bully. And we can flip between those three roles within like a sentence, within an interaction. But it's like an unconscious old story that we're playing out within those three roles. And the flip side of that is the empowerment triangle. And each of those roles then flip into a more empowering agency-led role. So the most important one is moving from victim to creator. So where are you being a victim in your life, and how can you shift that to be a creator of your life? The rescuer, which would have been my childhood default role, so I need to really watch out for it, moves into coach. So if you can learn to be a coach and ask coaching questions, you're no longer rescuing people, you're asking them questions so they can save themselves. And then the perpetrator turns into the challenger. So instead of being a bully, you're finding a way to articulate and challenge ideas, like being a positive disruptor. So super powerful. So just coming into what you were sharing about being in the classroom and teaching, because sometimes I don't share this stuff because I think teachers don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that I'm working 25 hours a week. That's really triggering and annoying. Like, shut up, Becky. But actually, if you flip that to the classroom, okay, so here's the measure. High return on energy. What in your life is giving you a high return on energy? Are you going into a meeting and coming out more energized than when you started? So this for me is high ROE. I love this. I'm going to come out buzzing, and I'm going to be going to my husband, oh my God, just had the best meeting. So you can apply that to teaching. And when I was teaching in early years, my entire job was high ROE. I was with kids. They're amazing. I miss that. That feeds me. If there's a 4-year-old in my vicinity, they are getting my attention. Poor kid. I'm just like, that's where my attention is. Like, because they're going to say something really engaging and fun, or they're going to be cute, or they're going to their imagination and the way they think. I miss that. So although I love what I'm doing and I'm fully committed to supporting educators to become the best versions of themselves and empower themselves, is that glass half full thing, right? I could be sat here going, oh, I wish I was back in the classroom. I really miss the kids, which I do. But I'm making the most out of the life I've chosen. So if I were in the classroom, the kinds of things I've thought about in the classroom is that high ROE. So I've been in jobs where it has been the most draining, terrible, toxic, horrible situation ever. I'm sure there are many teachers listening who are like, yep, I've been there, or I'm there. So when that's happened with me, it took me a long time to notice. So this is where all of that personal growth stuff is so important. So knowing where to put boundaries in place, knowing how to stand up to yourself, knowing when to say no, learning to articulate your vision. None of this we are taught in teacher training. All of this is really important to our jobs, which is what my next book's about, which is the writing retreat thing. But I've been there, and it's horrible and horrifying and damaging. And when I was in a job like that, I ended up signed off long-term sick, and I strongly considered never, ever going back to teaching again. And the thing that kept me buoyant, I'm going to do a shout out here to Ray Snape, because weirdly, the thing that kept me buoyant was Twitter, because I was engaging with educators in England who were making a difference, who cared, who were modeling to me that education could still be okay. There was all the toxicity, but I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at the people I admired. And Ray Snape, who's an incredible head teacher in the UK, was just constantly positive, buoyant, in touch with me. And I was like, okay, if Ray's there shining bright, I can get back there too. So if you're in the pits of a job where, and again, it's like they're being in a frog in boiling water, it comes up gradually. And then the reflection piece is afterwards, well, what was I missing? Where were the red flags? Why didn't I see them? What could I have done to stop that from happening? But I didn't see that. It grew over a period of about 18 months until it was so toxic, I had to get out. But then I became conscious of it. So then the next jobs that I had, I paid great attention. Is this a high return on energy experience for me? And here are some of the green flags. I'm going to think in the moment. So, and this is the thing. So schools often say, these are our non-negotiables. Like, God, that triggers me so much. Because I'm just like, how dare you? These are my non-negotiables for working in a school. So do they truly live and breathe and value well-being? I'll give you a good example of that. When I worked at Bangkok Pattern School, the first school I worked at after that experience, the leaders of the school finished at 2:30, would come round at 2:20 when you were telling a story to the class on a Friday with their wheelie bags saying, we're off on holiday for the weekend, go and enjoy your downtime, have a really good weekend. It was live and breathe. When it was lockdown, I was at Bangkok Pattern when we had lockdown. Their first priority was to create really clear boundaries so that teacher wellbeing was looked after and so that it was clear for parents. You know, there was none of this like having to be online the whole time. They were like, no, come online for your lesson or whatever you're doing. Check your emails at this half an hour, get out, because your wellbeing's super important now. So is the school living and breathing wellbeing, and how are they doing that? Are there amazing learning opportunities? So again, Bangkok Pattern, I had every single learning idea I came to with leadership with. And, you know, it's like, how are you supporting your most challenging staff who want to push things forward? It's like in Five Voices, the pioneer voice, which is my third voice, but I do like to pioneer forwards. So every time I came up with a harebrained scheme and I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this book study. I want to create this. They were like, right, how can we create a team around you, Becky, to make that happen? Amazing. So well-being, learning, is it really valued? Am I going to be seen, heard and valued? And then does it match your values? So again, music to my ears. I walked in. My first day at Pattern, I was in year one. And one of the team leaders, Sarah Gorgon, who is oh my God, you would love Sarah Gorgon, like her play-based practice, amazing. The first thing she said to me was, okay, Becky, so our focus on year one this year is we're bringing play up to year one and embedding that more. And we're going to be developing the characteristics of effective learning. And I was like, if I'd have known that, I'd have definitely applied. So, you know, does it align with your pedagogy? And then I guess as well, in terms of the learning culture, is that a supportive and non-judgmental learning culture? So again, I see some international schools as like rehab for UK teachers, because we have been utterly traumatized by the system, which we talked about in our mastermind yesterday and got quite angry about, because it really isn't okay that this system has decimated adults and children. It's just been absolutely like I can't think about how to say it without swearing, a mess, a royal mess. Yeah, so when I was at Pattern, the system of reflection and feedback was so supportive, and it took me a long time to unlearn the judgment that I've been taught. You know, it took me a long time to be okay with people coming into my classroom. It took me not that long, a couple of terms. But then to realize actually leadership want me to invite them in so we can discuss this new idea that I'm developing. So those are a few green flags. Is well-being lived and breathed? Does it align with your values? Will you be allowed, and sounds nuts, will you be allowed to develop learning? Will you be connected with people and given a chance to expand as an educator? And like yours might be different, but that's what I'd be looking for. So, yeah, lucky people in classrooms working with amazing kids and amazing schools. It's the best job in the world. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Absolutely. That's really powerful. I think as you were talking, I kept coming up like to values, you know, like you were talking about leadership values, but then you're also talking about the values of educators and the values of the school. And I think, you know, if we circle back, you know, to where you started talking about sort of that self-awareness and self-growth, that is so powerful for us all to tap into, you know, that connection that we have to ourselves. You know, what are our own values, you know? And I think sometimes I think Brene Brown talks about this, you know, when you're not living within your values is often when you feel that stress and burnout and feel, I guess, really unhappy, you know, because you're not able to, whether it's work in an environment that has values that align with yours, or, you know, perhaps you're not setting those boundaries, you're then acting out of your values. I think that values piece is so important, you know, for educators, for leaders to be connected to their own values, but then also to think about how do those values fit into whatever context I'm working in. I'm wondering, do you have any advice for leaders? And They might be educators, they might be leaders in schools or services, they might work outside of educational institutions or organizations. What advice would you have for anyone who is actually seeking to lead some kind of change, or, to be brave, to do something differently, perhaps change some of the practices around the way we work and show up and, embrace others and communicate and, support the people alongside us, particularly I think if we've perhaps experienced some of those more toxic cultures and ways of working, which can be so damaging. Like, do you have any advice for people who might be seeking to lead some kind of change?
Leaders need a support network of like minds. That's the simple thing. So in our masterminds, we have a leadership mastermind, and to me, that's my biggest honor to support those leaders, because they hold space for so many people. Who's holding space for them? I am. What an honor and a privilege. And they can then connect with one another and support one another and be in it together, so they can discover their blind spots. And we have hot seats where you can kind of unpick your grapples, and it's always like grapples that everybody else can learn from too. So whatever it looks like for you, find your people and find a network where you can continually grow and have that support and that inspiration, so that kind of, what's going to feed and fuel your approach to leadership, so that you're learning to become an ever better leader and you've got that support network to walk with you. And then you basically amplify your growth. You become unstoppable then, because you're connected to like minds. So you've got those people around you that are going to support you, and you're learning and leading forward. So you're very consciously competent in your leadership practice. And that's the key, I think, as well, from working in lots of different schools and teaching in lots of different schools. When I reflect on different leadership styles, and some weren't leaders, some were just managing, but when I reflect on what it felt like, what did it feel like to be led by that person? And what were they doing that made that so engaging or frustrating or disengaging, or whichever version of that it is? That's really powerful as well, to look at your role models around you and who's been brilliant at that. And again, for me, Bangkok Pattaya seems to be the place that's coming up. Like, just like the leader I had in early years, Raj, who's on LinkedIn, was just such an incredible leader. He was so clear in his pedagogy, like he knew exactly what was needed to be done. He was really clear in what priorities were. So that was really good for my nervous system when we had a massive workload, and he'd be like, that's your one priority, Becky. Really, really helpful. Really engaged and supportive, and he had a really good boundary. If the level of provision dropped, he'd pick us back up and be like, no, we're better than this. So yeah, looking at those leaders, who have you been led by that really made a difference, and what was it about them that made them a fantastic leader? That's helpful.
So powerful. And I think, if people are working in an environment where they're not inspired by the leaders in their close circle or in their context, I think, being able to look beyond where you work and find inspiring people who will support you and get to know you and champion you and encourage you, and sometimes I think we forget what we're capable of, but actually being around like-minded people is not only inspiring and provides opportunities for us to learn if we're, open to actually looking deeper at what they're doing and how it's impacting, yourself and the other people around you. But, sometimes we need someone who just sees something in us or can remind us that we're capable too, right? No different to children. I think as humans, we want to feel valued and we want to be celebrated too, which I love that, you're talking about that as part of Learning Pioneers as well. Becky, thank you so much for sharing all of your wonderful wisdom. It's been such a delight to talk to you. I've learned so much by listening to you, and I've got a whole list of books to go and read now, which is amazing. Where is the best place that listeners can find you, connect with you, learn more about your learning communities, if that's of interest to them?
Oh, yes. So social media, that's actually really perfect timing, because I've just decided to take a pivot on my social media, because I can't share everything that's on my mind on all the different social media. So I've decided to focus different approaches on different social media. So On LinkedIn, you can find me, Becky Carlzon. That's where I share a lot of personal growth pieces and stuff linked with learning pioneers. There's always play stuff that threads in too, but that's the focus. Blue Sky, which is just taking off. I'm going to be sharing play-based practice on there and stuff linked to Press Play. And we'll see what happens with Twitter and X. But my current inquiry is links between spirituality and education. And weirdly, because that is like super low vibrational social media, I'm thinking, let's go super high vibrational and see if we can connect on that. So that is fresh off the press what I'll be doing on Twitter, on X, and we'll see how that goes. It's either going to be a massive success or a huge failure, and I'm open to both. May as well give it a go.
Oh, I love that for so many reasons. That is brilliant. Thank you again. It's always such a joy to talk to you.
Yeah, you too, Amie. Thank you so much for inviting me. What an honour.